Dear students, welcome to another information video about the French Revolution. Today we will be talking about the long-term causes. I'm very sorry if you hear any noises in the background, but my neighbors are moving, or I don't know what they're doing, but they're making a lot of noise, so I'm sorry for that. Today we'll start with a note about the French Revolution, so about the long-term causes. Then you guys will work on an assignment or a few assignments that are in your agenda in Magister, and then you guys can ask any questions you want, put them in the chat on Microsoft Teams, so we can discuss them the next lesson when we go online and have an online lesson. The 4 long-term causes that we're going to look at is 1, the 3 estates. We already talked about that in the previous video as well. We're going to look at 2, the bourgeoisie, 3, the huge state debts, and 4, the enlightenment. But you guys already know a lot about the enlightenment because of the beautiful videos that you made yourselves. Before we start looking at the 4 long-term causes we will discuss today, it's useful that you guys know what long-term and short-term causes are. So today we're going to talk about the long-term causes, and the next lesson we'll talk about the short-term causes. Long-term causes are things or reasons why something happened, but they've been going on for a very long time. So they've been building up for a very long time. For example, if you have a bucket and you keep pouring water in it, it's still not overflowing, but you keep pouring water in it, and it's taking you a very long time to fill up that bucket. But it's happening for a long time. Then you have short-term causes, and those are the things that happen quite shortly to the event, and that's why the event happens. So, for example, that last few drops that you put in the bucket, they're close together, they're in a very short period, and that's what makes the bucket flow. So long-term causes are happening for a very long time, short-term causes for a very short time. So they're closer to the event you're talking about. Of course, we know that causes are oorzaken, an event is de gebeurtenis, and then we also have the consequences, de gevolgen of the event. And we also have a trigger event, or a lot of the times you have a trigger event, and that's the one thing that happened that makes the bucket overflow and people have enough with everything and they're done with it. And that's the reason why the event happens. So the first long-term cause we're going to talk about is the 3 estates. And I already told you something about this in the previous video. I told you that the French society was divided into 3 social layers, so 3 estates. The first social layer, so the first estate is the highest layer. It's the clergy. So those are the people who work in the church. And as you can see, it's put in a pyramid because that group was quite small. Then the second estate is the nobility. This is the king, the queen, the nobles of the sword, so knights, things like that, princesses of royal blood, dukes, counts, viscounts, etc., etc. So everyone that belonged to the noble family or noble families was in the second estate. And you were only born in that estate. So it's not that you could... If you were born in the third estate, so your parents were both farmers, for example, you could never go to the second estate. So the third estate is the lowest estate, and that's everyone else. This also includes lawyers, doctors, businessmen, merchants, soldiers, craftsmen, shopkeepers, peasants. So everyone else. So it doesn't mean that if you were in the third estate that you would be poor, per se. You could also be very rich, high educated, etc., etc. So, for example, a lawyer, but they still belong to the third estate. And the reason this provided any problem for the French people is that the first and the second estate, they were quite small and they didn't pay any taxes at all. So the third estate, they had to pay for everything. They were the ones that were paying duties. So the third estate only knew duties. They only had to pay and had almost no land. So they had nothing to say. They had no power. So they had to pay for all the taxes, but weren't able to say anything about how the country was governed, for example, and they didn't have any rights. And they could never go to the third or the second layer because they were the third layer, and the layer you were born in, that's the layer you would stay in. Then the second long-term cause is the bourgeoisie. And the bourgeoisie is actually a new social layer that comes up in France. And it's kind of like a layer in between the second and the third estate. So it's the rich people that belong to the third estate. So they're the upper rich layer of the third estate. And those people were traders, lawyers, etc., etc. They were educated, they paid a lot of taxes, so they had to pay for everything. And they didn't have anything to say, like I already told you. They didn't have any rights. So they demanded political influence. So they wanted to have something to say in the government to make life better for them. And one of the reasons they were so unhappy about this is that the French helped the Americans in their battle for freedom. So you had these 13 colonies that wanted to be independent from England. Because don't forget, America used to be a colony from England, of the crown. And these 13 colonies, they wanted to be free, and the French helped them. They gave them guns, they gave them money to fight their revolution, their battle of independence. And that rich third estate, they wanted the same thing. So in America, they said no taxation without representation, and that means that they didn't want to pay taxes anymore to the English government if they couldn't have anything to say in their own government. So they wouldn't pay taxes anymore without representation in the government. And that's actually the same thing that the bourgeoisie wants. So they don't want to pay taxes anymore if they don't get representation, if they don't get political influence. Then the third long-term cause is because of wars. So France was in all these expensive wars that they had to pay with these taxes, and they were really expensive, and there was hardly any money left. Also, we already talked about the Palace of Versailles from Louis XIV, which was very, very expensive, and he paid for this palace with taxes. So the taxes that the third estate would pay. And he had all these servants working for them. And this was all very expensive. And also because of this, there was almost hardly any money left. And another reason is that the nobility and the clergy, they refused to pay taxes. So they were the government. They ruled the entire country. They had land. They had big buildings, big houses. But they did not want to pay for all these things. They didn't want to pay for the war, so they refused to pay any taxes. So that third estate, they were the ones that had to pay for everything. Then the fourth long-term cause is the Enlightenment. And this is a new way of thinking that came up in France. And it's a way of thinking in which people believed that by rational thought, by rational thinking, so being logical, they could organize a better society. So by thinking in a rational way, they could create a better society than they already had. So they started thinking about how a country could be governed in the best way. Do we really need a king that spends all our money on wars and big palaces? Is that really the best way we can think of to govern a country? So because people started asking these questions, that's one of the reasons that later on the French Revolution started. So all these four things, it didn't happen in a short time. It happened over years and years and years. That's why they are long-term causes. And all these things kept building up and building up and building up, that the people were so unhappy that eventually they started revolting. And we had the French Revolution. Okay, right now I want you to go to your agenda in Magister, and I want you to do all the assignments that are in there. If you have any questions about the assignments or about this video, please put it in our team in Microsoft Teams so we can discuss those questions in the next lesson. Thank you very much, and bye.